What drives you? Or to ask it another way, what motivates you? Daniel Pink's book, Drive, attempts to help you to understand motivation, your own as well as others' motivation. Hello, my name is Chris Gibson, and I primarily like to review psychology books, especially related to social psychology. And so today's book, though, is a little bit of a departure because it's a popular level book that I kept hearing about and kept coming across that finally I decided to get a copy and read and review it. Now, let me be honest with you. I typically like to read books by academic psychologists, usually social psychologists, who write popular level books based on their research. That's usually my preference. And so I have a little bit of a mixed feeling when it comes to non-academics writing books based on psych research. Too often, they kind of see what they want to see, and they take the research far beyond what it can actually support. And so that kind of concerns me when it comes to these type books. For instance, and this is a common example, so Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers, he takes the work of academic psychologist Anders Ericsson, and he really oversimplifies it to the point of distorting it. People today still say that, still quote the 10,000 hour rule. Well, there's more to the 10,000 hours than just doing the same task, for 10,000 hours. You have to have things like deliberate practice and other parts of that to actually make sense of it. And so it's kind of a distortion of the research to say, oh, I just need to do it 10,000 hours and I'll become an expert. Well, yeah, you can become an expert in doing it wrong. And so I get a little concerned when, popular writers and speakers, I mean, these guys, they're talented in what they do when it comes to writing and speaking. It's just sometimes their interpretation of the psych research concerns me a little bit. Now, in this case, Daniel Pink, he bases a lot of what he says off DC and Ryan's research. Now, I'm not trying to suggest Pink distorts or oversimplifies their research to the point of distortion, because I haven't read enough of their research, although actually in studying his book, it's made me want to go read more of their research and their self-determination theory. But I'm a little cautious about this whole thing. Now, Pink does do two things that kind of make me nervous right away. First, he looks for examples to support his interpretation of the research, especially in the business world. And sometimes when we're looking for examples like that, we only see what we want to see, which kind of concerns me. Second thing is, he builds applications upon the research for individuals, businesses, educators, parents that may or may not be supported by the research. In other words, I get the feeling already that he's overextending the research a bit. Okay, so let's get into the contents and some of my comments on the book. So in this book, Pink introduces the early discoveries of what's called intrinsic motivation. Harry Harlow, Edward Deci, they made some early discoveries that tended to challenge what was then the orthodox view of motivation, which was more rooted in behaviorism, B.F. Skinner and some of those. And so it was rooted more in that, and so intrinsic motivation was kind of initially ignored. And so I did think that was interesting. This third motivation, though, intrinsic motivation, really becomes very important. And part of what they discover is that rewards and punishment, like in behaviorism, the rewards and punishment, though, tend to dampen intrinsic motivation. So it can actually hurt the motivation then. Now, in part 1, chapter 1, Pink, he seeks to demonstrate how motivation 2.0, the behavioristic approach, the rewards and punishment approach, really no longer works that well in our society. With that approach, when it's used with problems that require new solutions, it tends to lessen intrinsic motivation, especially when creativity is needed to address a certain type of problem. And so then in chapter 2, he continues there and he talks about motivation 2.0, behaviorism, carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments, and how often it doesn't work. Now, the thought is that rewarding an activity will get you more of it, and punishing an activity will get you less of it, which intuitively, okay, and with behaviorism, is true to some degree. A qualification, though, is that a person's baseline financial needs and things must be met to measure their motivation. If the baseline motivation is met, rewards and punishment tend to decrease motivation. And so that was an interesting point to me. If the person's baseline needs are met in terms of, say, it's work, so that they're financial, then the extra rewards and punishments tend to decrease their motivations. So in other words, the traditional reward punishment, if then rewards, end up giving us less of what we want instead of more of what we want. Intrinsic motivation tends to result in high performance, creativity, good behavior. But if the baseline's met, then traditional rewards and punishments, if then type approach gives us more of what we don't want: unethical behavior, addiction, short-term thinking. And so there's issues there that we have to be aware of and kind of need to address. Now, in chapter 2a, there Pink gives special circumstances in which rewards and punishments still work. Now, once again, the baseline needs to be adequate. If it's a routine task, now these routine task rewards do tend to enhance performance for routine task for a time. Pink then gives some suggestions for making these if-then rewards work in given situations. And so I kind of drew my own little chart with this. With these routine tasks, if you use extrinsic rewards, you can get better performance. The problem is, and this kind of goes along with the idea of it feeding into addiction, is you have to get more external rewards so that the person will keep doing it and keep being motivated. But if it's a creative task, if it's a new task, if it's a task that there's not a set kind of method or pattern for it, then you need intrinsic motivation so that the person will give better performance. And so we have this kind of interesting dilemma here. Now, he goes on in chapter 3 to discuss Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is based on 3 innate psychological needs. These 3 innate psychological needs are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Now, in addition, Pink builds on Douglas McGregor's Theory Y, which uses 2.0 style management, and Theory X, which uses 3.0 style management. For these, he develops his Type 1 and his Type 10, or Type X. I think he means Type 10. I'm not sure. His Type 10 behavior, though, is driven by extrinsic desire rather than intrinsic ones. It's concerned with external rewards, whereas Type 1 behavior is fueled by intrinsic desire more than extrinsic desires. Type 1 behavior requires motivation 3.0, not motivation 2.0. Now, in light of his Type 1 and Type 10 behaviors, he says this: Type 1 almost always outperforms Type 10. Type 1 is both born and made. Type 1 does not disdain money or recognition, but also if you go way beyond the baseline, it's going to decrease motivation and go more toward your Type 2. Type 1 behavior is a renewable resource. Type 1 behavior promotes greater physical and mental well-being. And so he's obviously making his case for his type 1 motivation, which he calls motivation 3.0. And like I said, this is really based on Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which has a lot of research, a lot of support behind it. It's a very interesting theory, a very robust theory. And so he moves on then in part 2 to discuss the 3 elements. Now, his 3 elements, though, are different by one than Deci and Ryan's 3 elements. His 3 elements are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Their 3 was competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So the difference here is he uses purpose and covers that in chapter 6, whereas they use relatedness. And so I do find it interesting. It parallels self-determination theory, but then it also departs from it. And so the real question is, when it departs from it, does it depart from it with good research support to depart from it? So in chapter 4, Pink does give credit to Deci and Ryan for autonomy. He acknowledges it as the most important of the 3 basic needs. So autonomy means acting with choice. Greater autonomy results in greatness. It results in greater well-being. So greater autonomy results in greater well-being. He argues that we need autonomy in the areas of task, in other words, what you do, time, when you do it, technique, how you do it, and team, who you do it with. And so I can see where autonomy is important. I've been in positions before where I lacked autonomy in that position, and because I lacked autonomy in that position, especially in the main area of my responsibilities, honestly, I was very unmotivated because I really had no say-so in that area. And when you have no say-so in an area, and it's a primary area that you work in that particular position, then it's really demotivating. Now, he goes on to chapter 5, and there he talks about the topic of mastery. And with that, he's guided by Csikszentmihalyi. Okay, hopefully I said it right. If you want to know more about him, look up his book, Flow. It's Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is his book. And so there he relies heavily on the biography and research of Csikszentmihalyi. And their mastery seems to be synonymous with competence from self-determination theory. Pink says that autonomy leads to engagement, which then leads to the second element of type 1 behavior, which is mastery. And he defines mastery as the desire to get better and better at something that matters. So at this point, I'm hoping kind of that he based this on Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory. Otherwise, did he just kind of pick a concept out that logically made sense to him and flowed? Or how did he come up with it? And so here I kind of have some questions about that already, as far as how these work together, or is he just picking major concepts from different researchers, different books that he liked? And if that's the case, then we just switch from doing psychological research to doing philosophy, okay? And that's fine. I mean, that's fine if that's what we're going to do, but just acknowledge it, I guess. Csikszentmihalyi's autotelic experiences are self-directed experiences, and this does seem to support Pink's move toward mastery in this chapter, but it seems to leave out some of Erickson's research, which may have actually enhanced this chapter if it had been referred to. But it is funny that here in this chapter, he draws on 3 researchers and their concepts. He draws on Carol Dweck's Mindset, which she has a book out by that title, Angela Duckworth's Grit, her book came out after Drive, but a lot of her research had already been published in academic journals. And Dave Gallinson's Asymptiat. Yeah, I'm not so good at saying that one. But he uses their concepts to flesh out this chapter. And so I kind of question, one, why did he depart from Deci and Ryan to begin with? And then when he goes with Csikszentmihalyi, his biography, his research, he didn't stick with it though, and he branched off of that into these other researchers. So these researchers and their concepts, they're certainly complementary to the idea of mastery. But once again, I kind of felt like we switched from doing psych research to philosophy at some point in this chapter. And then lastly, chapter 9 deals with purpose. Now, is this synonymous to Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory's relatedness? No, it's really not. Okay, I mean, it seems like competence and mastery could kind of go together, but here, relatedness and purpose don't really go together. So it really does look like he's going with a logical progression from autonomy to mastery to purpose. And once again, I feel like we switched over. We switched over from doing psych research to doing philosophy. And that's fine. I just wish he would acknowledge that in the book somehow. So at the end of this chapter, chapter 9, Pink does return to Deci and Ryan. And he talks about their research on profit goals, fame and fortune, and purpose goals, which are helping others, learning, and personal growth. Those with purpose goals reported higher levels of satisfaction and well-being than those with profit goals. And so he applies these findings to individuals and companies. Once again, a logical deduction. But I did like the research from Deci and Ryan in this part, because those who are just out to make money and to get rich, ultimately it doesn't add to their sense of well-being. And they had higher levels of depression, anxiety, and other things. But for those people who have more altruistic personal goals, personal development goals, helping other type goals, well, for those folks, they had an increase in their levels of satisfaction and well-being, and I think that's important to note. So when it comes to purpose, do want to recognize that. Now, part 3 of Drive contains the Type 1 Toolkit, and Type 1, of course, being the intrinsic motivation that he's been talking about throughout this entire book. This isn't really chapters, but it's various ways to apply his concepts to individuals, to organizations, to teaching children, to parenting children. And I also felt like some of it was shamelessly self-promoting, as far as self-promoting of the book. So you kind of have that mix here. Admittedly, I like some of his applications, and I would probably use some of these ideas. I mean, some of them were good, kind of personal development, self-development ideas, and I'm not opposed to that. When I think about how would I rate this book, well, when I rated it on Goodreads, on the psych research, 2 stars is about the best I can do, honestly. But if I were to rate it, though, in terms of communication, writing, kind of self-help, I would give it 4 stars. It's just, I do feel like that in reading this book, we switched over from doing psych research and what the psych research was showing and the support and the results from that, we switched over to philosophy. And we started doing, using philosophical tools rather than psychological tools. And so I do find it interesting. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. If I could break that down, I would give it 2 stars for the psych research and 4 stars for the writing. Because I do think he's a very effective writer and speaker. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this one. I do kind of hope my next book, I probably will do something. I'm really thinking about doing Mindset, because I've started it and kind of want to get it read and reviewed, finished. But it is by an academic psychologist, and I think it would be a good book to review. And then there's other social psychological books I would like to do as well. So anyway, that's my take on Drive. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a like, maybe a share. I do have some links below if you're interested in possibly buying the book Drive. I have an Amazon link there. It is an affiliate link. So full disclosure, it's an affiliate link. And then I have links to some of my other book reviews on YouTube, as well as the Amazon links to those books as well. So those are in the description down below. Hope you'll take a look at that, and we'll talk to you later.